Welcome to Unpacking Terms. Today, the term we're going to be unpacking is focus on form. As usual, let's start by acknowledging where our ideas come from. What I'll present here is an abridged, simplified version of the great work by Michael Long, Nina Spada, Patsy Lightbound, Catherine Dowdy, Jessica Williams, Rod Ellis, and many more. Before talking about focus on form, we need to discuss the umbrella term, Form-Focused Instruction, FFI. And that encompasses all pedagogical interventions that aim to turn the learner's attention to linguistic form. That could be vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, pragmatics, semantics, etc. And that could be done in different ways. Long 1991 makes this big distinction between focus on form, singular, and focus on forms, plural. The first one, which many times it is referred to as F on F, focus on form, singular, the main goal is communication. And attention to form happens as needed. So for example, it can be in the form of feedback, in the form of input enhancement, which we will discuss in another episode. But the main goal, everything that's happening in the classroom, revolves around communication. Contrast with focus on forms, plural, where the lessons are essentially pre-planned teaching of structures one at a time. Usually, they involve learning rules, memorization, drills, mechanical practice. As you can see from the smiley faces and the sad faces, one is good and one is bad, to simplify it a lot. Longley and Hillman summarized it best when they said, "The dominance of grammar-based approaches and learning language intentionally continues despite theoretical and empirical evidence suggesting that they are ill-conceived." And they later continue to say, "To teach isolated grammatical structures first for communication later is to put the proverbial cart before the horse." In other words, instead of leading with how we say something, let's lead with what we're trying to communicate, and then we address the how as needed in the course of communication. So let's talk about focus on form, singular. Different scholars distinguish different types of focus on form. Michael Long, for example, talked about reactive versus incidental. Spada and Lightbound talk about isolated versus integrated. Rod Ellis talks about planned versus incidental. And all of these distinctions are fairly similar. The main difference between isolated and integrated is that isolated happens before or after a communicative task, whereas integrated happens during a communicative task or content-based lesson. The important thing to remember is that in both cases, communication is the driving force and not a predetermined list of structures to cover. And if you're wondering, well, but how do I choose? Do I have to choose between isolated and integrated, or is one better than the other? Spada and Lightbound 2008 do a thorough review of research up to that point and essentially conclude that there are several factors to consider, such as the age of the learners, their proficiency level, the communicative value of the structure, how similar or different it may be from the learner's native languages, etc. So it's not clear-cut, and it's not a matter of one being always better than the other. Both belong in a communicative classroom. Now, the big question: do we focus or do we not focus on form? The most simplified answer I can give you is that many SLA researchers and scholars agree that focus on form, singular, can be beneficial. We do have to acknowledge that some argue that it could be detrimental. Names like Krashen and Truscott would say that it could possibly be hindering acquisition as opposed to facilitating it. Now, let's keep in mind these SLA researchers that agree that focus on form can be beneficial are not advocating for focus on forms plural. The other thing to keep in mind is that the word beneficial is very subjective, and it doesn't mean that it's going to lead to instant, immediate benefits. And so, in a nutshell, form and meaning should always be integrated, even in isolated focus on form. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time.